Hello and welcome to part 32 of my video series on how to use Blender 2.6. This is part 3 of a 3-part mini-series on how to create an IK, or inverse kinematics, character rig in Blender. Now this is part 3 of a 3-part mini-series, so if you haven't gone ahead and seen part 1 and part 2 yet, I'll put the links up on the screen right now. You should start with part 1 and then follow into part 2 and then come to this video. If you have not downloaded, or if you want to follow along, you can download the same character mesh that I started with and follow along, or use your own character if you have one. So in part 2, we created finger bones on the hand, and we set up some constraints to make the fingers bend more easily or turn into a fist more easily. We also duplicated the entire left arm and left hand over to the right hand side, had Blender automatically rename those. And we created a hip bone to make the hips more accurately be able to rotate and move. So in this video we're going to finish the entire rig. We're going to create some leg and feet bones and one more controller bone for the entire thing, and then parent the mesh, the actual mesh, to the bone structure. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to add the leg bone first, so we'll select the armature and go into edit mode. We're going to add a new bone, so we'll put the 3D cursor where we think it should go, or start, which should be right up where the top of the leg bone should be. Don't put it too low. Put it where you think on yourself your leg actually rotates, right about there. I have the gizmo turned off right now. If you click this little three-way axes button, it turns that gizmo off. That gizmo could get in the way when you're putting the 3D cursor in your scene, so I have it turned off sometimes. So let's go ahead and put that 3D cursor where we think it should go, and press Shift A in edit mode, of course, to add the new bone, and we'll move it down to the ankle approximately, and then I'm actually going to turn on the screencast keys. This bone is way too thick, so we'll select it and press Ctrl Alt S to make it thinner and drag or move your mouse inwards towards the bone. That looks pretty good to me right there. From the side view, we'll correct the tail of that leg bone so it's in the right spot. Now, the common amateur mistake is to put the end of that bone, the joint, right in the middle of the mesh, but actually it should go up where the ankle is, where the joint actually is. Go feel where the bony ankle sticks out on the outer side of your foot or ankle area. And that's where your bone should rotate from ideally. I'm going to turn my gizmo back on, and we'll move that a little bit towards the center there, but it's still up higher than most people would think. Let's go ahead and subdivide this leg bone up into 2, so W subdivide, and move this joint up and forward. Even if you're working with a different mesh or a different character mesh, you still want to have a bend in your leg, a little slight bend in your leg, even in edit mode. And that just helps you out when you're posing the character. Forcing the leg a little bit to be bent when you model it, even in edit mode, will force the leg to bend forward rather than backward, which wouldn't really exist in real life. So in this model we have to anyways because the leg is bent, but don't leave the leg totally perfectly straight, in other words. Alright, so let's go ahead and name these bones. Of course, we're going to name them leg underscore upper dot L. Don't forget the dot capital L on all these left bones. Leg underscore lower dot L. And we can go ahead and create some feet bones. Now we're going to do a kind of a unique setup here. I'm going to extrude out a foot bone, but of course we're starting at the ankle, so I'm going to extrude out. And it does not matter that the bone is kind of not centered on the mesh. It only matters where the joints are. So it's going to go right about there. And I'll go to the bottom view. That's Control 7 to get to the bottom view. And I'll put the tail of that bone right about there. That looks pretty good to me. And the roll of these bones is now kind of messed up, even the leg bones. So I'm going to select all 3. Actually, I'll just do the leg ones first. To recalculate how these bones are twisted, of course, is Control N. And then because these leg bones are more up and down, we're not going to use the Z recalculate. Control N, not Control M. We're going to use either X or Y. It doesn't matter. And then this foot bone, because it isn't up and down, we can use the Z axis. Control N and recalculate on the Z axis. And so now we're going to extrude the toe bone. We're only going to make one. And for this rig, we're not going to ever animate the toes wiggling individually, so Why bother making it harder on ourselves? There we go. It looks okay to me. Let's go ahead and check that from the side view. Make that a little bit up. And that looks pretty good. We can recalculate it if we see fit. Doesn't really matter too much for the toes. And that looks pretty good, but we want to be able to rotate this foot in more accurate ways. You can, if you stand up right now, or if you're sitting down with your feet on the ground, you can rotate your foot in two ways. You can rotate it on the heel, so you can plant your heel and rotate your foot around, or you can stand up on your toes. You can roll your foot on the ball of your foot. In other words, you can stand on your tippy toes. In other words, this bone needs to, or this foot needs to be able to rotate from here and from here, which means that this setup is going to be a little bit more complicated, but that is okay. Let's go ahead, or to accomplish that really, and to accomplish an IK rig, in other words, we want to be able to grab a bone down here and move it up and have the leg kind of follow along and bend. We actually need to create one more bone to make IK possible. But let's go ahead and kind of fix the way this bone rolls first. I'm going to change the view back to octahedral so you can see kind of what's happening here. In order to make the bone roll on the ball of the foot, in other words right here, I'm going to go back into pose mode to emphasize this. Bones always rotate from their bases, in other words the thicker end of the bone when we're in octahedral view. They don't rotate from the tail, the thin pointy end. So if I press R, it rotates from up here and not down there. So in other words, we have to switch the direction of this bone to switch the ends, so the bone rotates down here. And we can do that quite easily. We can just go into edit mode, and with the bone selected, we can press W and switch direction, which is also Alt F. And that changes the direction of the bone. Of course, we can't really tell that when we're in B-bone, which is why I switched back to octahedral temporarily. Now, when we switched the direction, a few things happened. The roll of the bone got messed up. You can tell that just by looking at it. So I'll press Control N and recalculate the roll on the Z-axis. So it's, again, pointing, or if a flat side is pointing straight up. And the other thing that happened when we switched the direction is that the bone actually lost its children and it lost its parent. It became kind of disconnected. And that's okay, because we actually are going to do a kind of a different setup with this foot. We're going to create one more bone that's going to act as the IK target, kind of like the IK hand in the hand at the heel. When you do an IK setup with an IK target, like the IK hand was, there needs to be a base of a bone right here. And right now there isn't. Because we switched the direction of this bone, there is no longer a base of any bone right here, which is why we need to create one more bone, at least one more bone in this setup. So with the tail, it is the tail of either of these bones, the leg or the foot bone, we're going to extrude one more bone outwards. It doesn't matter which one you select. There are two tails here, but I'll just press E, and then Y, because we want it to go straight back. And then it's just going to be a small bone, so it's just going to go out a little bit. And that's going to be called the ankle IK. So let's go ahead and name these bones. With that bone selected, I'll go to the Bone tab and name it ankle IK.L. And then select the foot bone, and we'll call it foot.L. And the toes bone will, of course, be toes.L. And so now we have to kind of fix the parent structure in here, because when we flip the direction of this foot bone, it lost its children and parents. So actually, because the IK bone, it's the same as the hand IK bone, it has to be separate from the rest of the chain. In other words, it can't be part of the same chain. It can't be a child of the leg bone. So actually, we're going to make the foot bone, the ankle bone, and the toe bone connected, but separate from the leg bone. So we're going to make the ankle IK bone and the toe bone children of the foot bone, but then those three will be separate from the leg bones. So I'm going to select the toe and then hold shift and select the foot and press Control P and keep offset in this case, and then the ankle IK bone, and then hold shift and select the foot bone and press Control P. And this time we can actually make it connected, because the tail, it's connected to the tail, which is the right way. Children are always connected to the tail if they're connected, so that works in that case. So now, if I go into pose mode, we made the ankle and the toe a child of the foot bone, and it's not connected to the leg, so I can just grab the foot and the ankle and the toes follow along, but the leg does not move yet. And so now we're going to create the IK constraint setup. So if you think back to part 2, when we created the constraint setup, we always selected the target first, which is the ankle IK bone in this case, just like the hand IK bone was before. And then we hold shift and select the bone that is actually going to be constrained to point towards that target bone. And then we press Control Shift C, and that will bring up the Add Constraint menu, and we're going to choose Inverse Kinematics, IK. And that constraint gets added to the bone that we selected second, so the lower leg bone. And if we go into the Bone Constraints tab, we can actually see the IK or the Inverse Kinematics constraint options here, and we can see the target is the ankle IK bone, that small bone down there. So the last step is to change the chain length. Right now it's to unlimited, which is 0, but we want it to be 2 bones in length. So from the target bone, the ankle IK bone, it's 1, 2 bones up to the base of the leg. So now if I grab the foot bone, because the foot bone is a parent of the ankle IK bone, and the ankle IK bone is a target of the leg, if I grab the foot bone and move it up, there we go. Gee, it moves the leg nicely. And because we put a bend in the leg, it knows to bend forward and not backward, which is coming back to what I talked to you before. So let's go ahead and clear that pose out. I'll press Alt-G to clear the location of that bone back to its default. And we can add a few more bones to make this work better. As I said, we want to make this foot be able to rotate from the ball, which it can right now. I can move or rotate that bone forward to make him stand on his toe. But of course this bone now sticks down into the ground, and we can solve that by going to the Bone tab with that bone selected, and unchecking under Relations, we can uncheck Inherit Rotation, and that'll make it not rotate when we rotate its parent. So I'll go ahead and select all the bones, press Alt-R to clear it out, and then do it again. So now he's standing on his toe or on the ball of his foot, like that. So that's really nice. I'll press Alt-R to clear that out. But we want him to be able to rotate his foot on the heel as well. So we're going to create one more bone in the foot, just one more, I promise. And it's going to be called the foot controller bone. So we'll go back into edit mode, and we'll select the tail of either the foot or the leg bone, doesn't matter which one, that one or that one. And we'll press E and then Y to make it go straight forward. And we're going to select that bone and make it totally separate, not have any parent. So we'll press Alt-P and clear parent. So now it's disconnected from everything, but it's still inside the armature. And we'll press G to move it down to the bottom of the foot. And now we want to put the base of this bone right at the heel, right at the mesh heel, or the heel of the character. We want it to line up with the base of this bone right there. Now this foot isn't modeled very well. To be honest, it's not flat on the ground, so we're just going to imagine that it's going to be right about there, and then I'll go to the bottom view, which is Control 7, and make the foot bow out a little bit, and move that one right about there, so it follows the bowing of the foot, and we will name this bone foot underscore controller dot L. And we are almost there. We're going to make all the bones in the foot, so the toe, the foot, and the ankle IK, children of this foot controller bone. So back into edit mode, we just have to make the foot bone a child of the foot controller bone, because the other two bones are already children of the foot bone, if that makes sense. So I'm going to select the foot bone, hold shift, select the foot controller bone, and press Control P, and keep offset, because they're not actually connected. Keep offset, there we go. And now in pose mode, I can grab this new foot controller bone, and I can grab it, and it should control the entire foot. I should be able to rotate it, and it'll rotate at the heel. Okay? And I can rotate the actual foot to be standing on its toes. So really here I get a lot better control than just having, basically 2 feet or 2 feet bones. It's more complicated, but if you practice this several times, which I have now, you'll get the hang of it and you'll understand it fully. I try to do my best to understand or to explain how these bones were kind of linked to each other. Hopefully you can follow along. Try watching the video again if you didn't follow along the first time. So I'm going to press Alt-G and Alt-R to clear out those rotations and poses. And we're almost done. All I have to do now, for the leg at least, is to make a knee target. Same as the elbow target. If we bend the leg, we want to be able to tell the leg which way to point its knee. So we're going to go back into edit mode and select the knee joint and extrude out, so E, and then Y to extrude forward. And I'm going to go back into B-bone view. And we're going to make this bone just very short. And we're going to make it like a cube, so Control-Alt-S to make it square. And then we'll press Alt-P to make it separate. We don't want it to have any parents or children. So we'll say clear parent. And now we can move that bone forward, just like the elbow bones were back. And we're going to give it a name. So under the bone tab, we're going to call this one knee ik.l. And here's where the magic comes in again. We're going to do the exact same thing with the elbow as we did, or with the knee as we did with the elbow. So we're going to select the target first, which is the knee ik.l, and hold Shift and select the upper leg bone, and then press Control-Shift-C and select Inverse Kinematics, and go to the Bone Constraints tab to change the options on the constraint that's now on the upper leg bone, and change the chain length to 1. And as you can see, the knee IK bone is the target, which is that one right there. So now if we grab the foot bone, we can move it up, and the leg goes nicely forward, but we can also now make the leg point, or the knee point, towards this bone. Now when you're making these IK bones and controller bones, I'm going to actually unpose Alt-R and Alt-G. It's important to turn off deformation of these bones, and that's very important before you actually make the mesh a child of the armature. So what I mean is that select the bones that aren't actually going to deform the mesh, which is the any of the IK bones or the controller bones, and under the bone tab, turn off deform. So just on the IK bone, so that one and this controller bone. We don't want those to actually deform the mesh. They're just going to control the other bones. They're not really meant to be part of the actual skeleton of the character that makes the skeleton move. Same thing goes with the elbow IK bones. I turned those off in the previous videos, and the hand IK bones, and the rib IK bone. So any of the IK bones don't have the form turned on. That's important. Same thing with the controller bones for the feet. So now we are done the leg. We just have to duplicate it. So let's go into edit mode, press A, press B to box select. We're going to box select everything on that side. I missed one, so I had to right click, shift right click that one. And now we're going to do the exact same thing as we did for the arm. We're going to duplicate it and then flip it over and have it auto rename. So we're going to change our pivot point to the 3D cursor. Press Shift C to put our 3D cursor back in the middle of our world, so we can flip over that point very easily, or pivot over that point very easily. And then we'll duplicate all these left leg bones, so Shift D, and then right click to put them back in the exact same spot, and then S to scale on the X axis, so press X, and then -1, and then enter. So I'll do that again. We duplicated them, and then right click to put them back in the exact same spot. And then we pressed S, X, -1, enter. And done. We'll auto rename them. So under the armature menu, flip names, not auto name top bottom or auto name front back or left and right, just flip names works. And so all these bones will now have .R on the end instead of .L or .L.001. And now we'll fix the roll. Sometimes when you flip over the bones, the roll, how they're twisted, gets messed up on the side. So the easy kind of cheat to fix this is just to select all of the original bones in the leg, and then in the tool shelf, find the armature options heading. You might have to scroll down for that. check X-axis mirror, and then press Control R to start rolling these bones. And because we clicked on X-axis mirror over here, you'll see the other side copy what we're doing with this left side. Now we're going to start rolling it, but then we don't really want to change anything, so we'll right click. And that'll make everything kind of snap back to its rightful default position, which will also fix the new right side as well. So we'll uncheck X-axis mirror and go back into pose mode, and we are almost done. I'm going to save this file as underscore 03 instead of underscore 02, just so we have multiple iterations of the file. And we forgot to parent the legs to the hips. So we'll go back into edit mode, select both of the upper leg bones, not the bases, but the actual leg bones, and then select the hip bones last, of course with shift select, and then Control P and keep offset. So now these legs are parented to the hips. If we go into pose mode, we can grab the hips, we can move the hips around, we can rotate the hips. Actually, I forgot to turn the pivot point back to medium point. So now it'll actually rotate around the object and not the 3D cursor. Okay, so that's what the hips will look like. Let's go ahead and clear that out. Alt-R, Alt-G. And now I can rotate those hips even better, and that'll look nice. Okay, so that's almost everything. We're going to create one more bone, and that's going to be a controller bone for the entire rig, the entire armature. And we do this because we want a way of moving the entire thing around, the entire character around, by just grabbing one bone. And right now we can't. If I try grabbing the pelvis or the hips, which is like the most high bone in the hierarchy of the entire structure, and moving the entire rig, it just kind of drags everything else along behind. And that isn't ideal at all. So I'll right click to put that back. What we want is a bone that controls or is a parent of all of the IK bones and all of the bones that are kind of at the top of the hierarchy. So I'm going to press Shift C to put my 3D cursor back in the middle and go into edit mode, and we're going to add a new bone right between his feet. So Shift A to add a new bone, which it is, you can't really see it too well, and I'll move that down to make it shorter and move it and make it narrower with Control Alt S. It doesn't need to be quite that tall, so I'll move it down a little bit. And we're going to name this bone. A good name that I like is to name it the name of the character and then controller. So I'm going to call my character Fred, and then underscore controller, and enter. And now we're going to make all the IK bones and all the controller bones a child of this bone. So I'm going to select in edit mode the IK bones, so the elbow IK bones, and then the hand IK bones, and the rib IK bone, and the hip bone as well, because that's like a controller bone. That's actually the most high bone in the hierarchy. And the knee IK bones, and the feet controller bones. And then I'll select the foot or the Fred controller bone last, and press Control P, and keep offset, of course. So now all of these bones are children directly of this Fred controller bone. So now, in pose mode, I can just grab that one bone and grab it, and the entire mesh will stay in the same pose, but I can move the entire thing at once. Sometimes if you grab or download somebody else's character that's rigged from blendSwap.com, there will be a ring with some arrows sticking out of it at the base of the character. And that's actually a bone. That's actually the same bone as this, but it just has a custom shape. So that's what that bone is. It's the same as this bone, but this bone is just a normal shaped bone and doesn't have a custom shape, which we'll talk about in a future video. So we're all good to go. I'll press Control S to save. We'll make a new copy, save as, and call it underscore 04, and we'll parent the mesh to the armature. Before I do that, I'm going to make sure that all of the IK bones and controller bones do not have deform turned on. I already see that this Fred IK or this Fred controller bone still has deform turned on, and it should not, because we don't want it to control the inside of the feet and legs. So we'll turn deform off, make sure the feet bones, the feet controller bones, don't have deform turned on. Same thing with the knee IK bones, and the hand IK bones, and the elbow IK bones, and the rib IK bone, Those should not have deform turned on, but everything else should. So it looks good to me. I'm going to select the mesh, hold shift, select any of the bones in pose mode, or they can be in object mode too, and then press Control P, and we're going to set the parent of the mesh to the bones with armature deform with automatic weights. So click with automatic weights, and now, because we're in pose mode, we can grab any of the IK bones, or any of the appropriate bones, and pose the character, and the mesh follows along. So I can pose the character, I can make the knees kind of go, you know, side to side. I can grab any of the, or either of the foot controller bones and move it up. I can rotate that bone around the heel. Okay, and it looks okay. I didn't do a very good job, so it's not totally accurate. And of course I can make the foot roll onto its toe, or the ball of the foot. So I'll change the orientation of the gizmo to normal, and then rotate that up so he's standing on some sort of an invisible box while tiptoeing. And we can rotate any of the head bone, and that looks good. So this is finished. We are done. That's the end of part 3. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.